Peppered moths. Has anyone taken a science class, life science class, in the last 30 years? 40 years? If you have, you've probably heard about peppered moths in England. And so let's talk about peppered moths, because this is heralded as one of the proofs that evolution occurs. Okay, so let's talk about peppered moths and find out if it's actually microevolution. So this is a picture of two peppered moths, actually. You probably can only see one, because when I blew this up on my computer, I could just barely make out the one that's right here. And you can see some of his antennae right there. But there is another peppered moth here. And so the theory it's been presented to millions and millions of school kids, is these peppered moths would land on these trees. And obviously, if you're bird hunting, which one is easier to catch? The black one, right? The one you can see. And so that one had a trait that kind of deselected it for carrying on, for mating and carrying on its genes and its traits. So the vast majority of the population of peppered moths were of this variety, this lightly colored one. Well, then man came along, and we started industrializing, and we started pumping out soot and stuff into the air, and the trees got the soot, and lichens no longer grew on the trees, and the trees became dark. And so now you can very clearly see on a dark tree, here's a peppered moth that's of the light variety, and here is the dark one. Now which one is more likely to be seen by the bird? And there was, in fact, an increase over a period of time in the number of the black moths in the population. So this is heralded as one of the present-day proofs of evolution. So let's talk about some problems with this paradigm and with this whole story that we told. There were no new species formed. The black moth existed before we started industrializing England, or for our ancestors started industrializing England. And they existed afterwards. The light ones existed before and afterwards. And in fact, the black ones carry genes for the white ones. And white ones carry genes, those, just like, have you seen Lydia? She has blonde hair and blue eyes. Well, Jill and I both have brown hair and black eyes. So how did that happen? Well, we carry recessive genes. And so it just happened that two recessive genes got together, blue eye, now she has blue eyes. So that information, even though you may not see it being exhibited on the outside, is still carried in our cells. Same thing with the moths. That information is carried in their DNA. So that's the second point. There's no new information introduced. They didn't introduce new information to the moth population. So the same species, no new species were introduced, no information on how to make a moth, no new information was introduced. And the experiments, at best, were based on wrong ideas, and at worst, were staged. Because it just happens that peppered moths don't land on trees a whole lot. They don't really, even today, I was reading an article, they don't know where they rest during the day because they are nocturnal animals. And so they're mostly gone during the day and out foraging at night. So, there was an increase in the black moths in the population. There's probably several factors that we don't fully understand, because now the white moths have come back and are the predominant moth in that area. So what we saw here was change within a species. Just like dog breeds. You can take a Great Dane and a poodle, and they can still have puppies. They're still the same species, you know what I'm saying? There's not a new species. We've just selected what we want within that species. Does that make sense? And here is a website where you can read more than maybe, I found it interesting, maybe more than what you want to read, but it's vertical thought. And actually, this is going to be your homework. If you look at the last pages, I printed out that article. So the last pages in your notes is the article on peppered moths, and I thought it was very good. But that's where you can find out some more information. Can't turn to it now and read it, though. More problems with evolution. The basis for evolution is natural selection. Natural selection. Remember, in the animals, there were human selectors. They were saying, I don't want this trait to be carried on. And so they didn't allow that animal to breed. Well, the basis for evolution is natural selection. There is some characteristic or some trait that does not help an animal survive, does not give it an advantage, and so it doesn't get to breed. Okay? That's not information generation, that's information removal. That's information removal. So the basis for natural selection is the reduction of information. So selective breeding removes information from the gene pool. It removes information from the gene pool. The cheetah is an endangered animal now, and if you listen to the environmentalists, they'll tell you it's because the variation in their DNA is so little. They're almost all exactly the same. So they don't have this ability to adapt and overcome. They've highly specialized to a couple different regions, and there's two populations, if I remember right, that are separated by geographical features, and they're trying to get those populations to mix because they need the information that's in each other's gene pool. But right now, they are an endangered species because they have had so much of their information removed. They've been highly specialized for their environment. So selective natural selection could be a harmful thing if it's done to too great of an extent. And here's another animal, the Dalmatian. Does anyone know of problems that are John knows problems with Dalmatians. If you're a Dalmatian lover, a lot of them are deaf. And this is one of those recessive traits. When they were breeding them to get spotted dogs, was one of those recessive traits that got bred into the breed. And it's because they have a lack of DNA information now. And there's other, like St. Bernards have real bad hip problems. So when we, your best, I'm serious, they have real bad joint problems. So, you've often heard that a mutt is your best dog, and it's got really a Heinz 57. So mutts have basically all the genetic code, the population of mutts. Now, you may have one individual that's, not a very good individual, but the population as a whole, they're a strong population because they can adapt and overcome. They haven't had information removed from their gene pool. So, if natural selection can't put in new information into our genetic information, well, maybe mutation can. And it actually can. Mutation can put new, quote-unquote, information into our DNA. And so if you talk to someone, they'll say, well, yes, natural selection doesn't do new information, but an ultraviolet ray could strike, DNA and make a pair flip. And then now we have, if that happens to be beneficial and it builds up over time, that's how we got all of our diversification. The problem is, although we've only been looking for 100 years, the problem is that no mutations have ever been observed to be beneficial. Who would want to say, yes, please let me be mutated? No one is going to ask for that. And here's just a common example of mutations. Here's a fruit fly, if you've ever done biology. Here's one that doesn't have any, it has wings, but not anything to get it off the ground, right? That's a mutation. It's not a beneficial mutation. It's not going to something that's going to help it survive. And so if it can't help it survive, it's not going to be selected for by natural selection, and therefore those genes won't be passed on. Does that make sense?